Shalom, everyone, and welcome to Reaching Higher, a podcast designed for Jewish children, where we embark on exciting journeys through interesting and enjoyable subjects. I'm your host, Atara, and together, let's jump in to the wonders that await us.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our newest episode of Reaching Higher. Our theme for today is construction and buildings. Let's jump right in and begin with an interview with my good friend Ilan. Ilan is a construction consultant. Don't worry, I also didn't know what that meant until I asked him. Let's begin right now. Hi, Ilan, and welcome to Reaching Higher. Can you introduce yourself, tell us where you're from and where you live now?
Hi, Atara. I'm Ilan Casper. I'm originally from Teaneck, New Jersey, and now I live in Ramat Beit Shemesh in Israel, and I'm a construction consultant here in Israel.
We know there are a lot of jobs in construction. What is the role of an architect versus a construction manager or an engineer? What other roles are there in planning or building houses and buildings?
That's a great question. I had this question from when I was in college and trying to understand exactly the different roles that each person in each job plays. So overall, the architect generally on most buildings, let's say a museum or a residential tower or a place where they're going to have offices, the architect is going to drive the design. They're going to decide what it's supposed to look like. And then they're supported by multiple engineers. So when we say engineer, we have a structural engineer who figures out how does the building stand. We have a geotechnical engineer who's going to understand the ground that the building is sitting on and how we make sure that the weight of the building isn't going to cause problems to the weight to the ground. Also, you have a mechanical engineer who's dealing with the air conditioning. You want to make sure that everybody's comfortable within the building. You want to make sure you have a plumbing engineer, so that way all the pipes go in. And those are all the engineers that help design the building. And then there's the construction manager who's going to take all that information and actually create the building that you want to make. Now, that's specifically on most buildings, but on some buildings, let's say a factory, where you're not so worried about how it looks, you want to make sure it's functional, you want to make sure it does what you need to do. The architect kind of takes a back seat, and the engineers are really the most important people on that design of the project.
Can there be a misunderstanding between the architect and the builders? Was there ever a time where an architect's plans turned out to be impossible to build?
So we certainly hope that the architect's plans are possible to be built. There's what we call a feasibility study of can we actually build it? And even after they design it, then it's aside for the overall building, there are definitely times when there's maybe too many pipes and air conditioning vents and sprinklers that need to be in the same place. And so there are conflicts, and then you have to figure out how it works. There's something called an RFI in construction, a request for information. And we use that so often in construction because that things sometimes don't exactly work out perfectly. And the construction manager needs to go back to the architect to understand, well, how do we solve this problem during the course of construction?
What materials do they use to build buildings? Is it the same materials that were used in the past?
So in the past, we used to focus more on clay, more on stones and bricks. Now we've shifted more towards steel and concrete. So most buildings nowadays are using those two materials. Sometimes you also have wood. We know wood is common in America to build houses. It's not as common here in Israel because wood is more expensive. So they usually build things out of concrete. But it's definitely changed over the course of time, the types of materials we use.
How do you think buildings will change in the future? Will we have houses made out of new materials or with special features?
So that's a great question. When it comes to the future, they're always trying to think of how can we make things better. And one of the big words these days that they're talking about is sustainability. How do I make sure that my building is using the energy it has, we have all the electricity, the heating and the cooling. And so we want to make sure that there's less carbon emissions, right? We want to make sure that our building isn't impacting the environment negatively. So there's something called green roofs where they actually have trees or grass on the roof. That's a big focus. And in terms of materials, there's always new plastics, new what we call synthetic materials that are, these are man-made materials in order to find something that might be able to be more flexible or to create a shape that is not as typical as just a beam or a column. We want to the architects are getting more creative, and it's giving us more unique buildings.
You're talking about using synthetic materials. What other technologies have been used recently that kids might find interesting?
Well, there could be some kids who've heard of 3D printing. Now, in construction, 3D printing is also now becoming popular. So usually when you're doing a 3D print, it's maybe you're on your table, you have a 3D printer and you're making, let's say you could make a little house, you can make a figurine. But now they have large machines with a large arm, and it's creating the walls of the house out of concrete using a 3D printed method where you make one layer and then another layer and another layer. And that's really impressive. The other thing is, just like we're talking about self-driving cars, we're trying to also apply that to construction sites where we have autonomous vehicles that, let's say, can do all the excavation without anybody there, which makes things a lot safer.
Is there a future where everything is automatable, or is there room for creativity?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of creativity that's needed, both when we talk about the design. The architect has to think of how can I create a building which is going to fit the needs. And we're always thinking about the cost when we think of construction projects. There's the cost, the schedule, and when it comes to cost, how can I design a building that's better? And also, when you're actually at the construction site, there's so many things you want to do all at the same time, and you can't just snap your fingers and the whole thing's built, but you have to know what's going to go first and what's going to go second. So we have to think about what's the order, and when I need to, let's say, put something in that I forgot, or the design was changed in the middle of construction, I have to be creative of how will I actually put that into the building.
How do you make sure that a building project is safe and follows all the rules and laws?
So I'm so glad you asked this question, because safety is the most important thing on construction sites. Nothing is more important than safety. We just talked about the schedule. We want to do things quickly, but if it's at a cost of safety, we don't do it. And there's always has to be at least one safety manager on the construction site who knows all of those rules. And additionally, of course, everybody else needs to know what has to happen, but there's at least one safety manager checking things. They'll meet in the morning to understand what the work's happening on the construction site, to make sure we know, is there anything being lifted on the construction site? And you have to worry about somebody underneath let's say, a beam that you're lifting. Safety is really the most important thing when it comes to construction. And there are laws around it, and there's people who that is their main role on the site in order to make sure that everybody comes home safe.
What is the most interesting building you have ever helped with?
So there's a couple of buildings that come to mind. First is the one that I'm currently working on. It's called a semiconductor fabrication plant. And in this large building, they make chips these are computer chips that go in your computer, your car, your phone, and it's a massive building. And one of the most rewarding things is to be a part of building Eretz Israel, building Israel up. And the other project that I was a part of is, we always like to be on TV. So I was part of building 5 news studios. And that was just so interesting, of the sets and all the screens that are involved. And I got to sit at one of the desks at a news studio.
Wow. What interesting and cool machines do you have at work?
So the coolest machine that we have at the semiconductor site is our large crane. This is one of the largest cranes in the whole world.
Wow. How much can it lift?
So it can lift 3,000 tons about. Now, what is that? Just to put things into perspective, that's about 7.5 large planes with everybody on board. Or if you want to think about it in terms of elephants, it's lifting 400 elephants all at the same time.
All right. Now I know who to come to if I need to lift 400 elephants. What advice do you have for kids that might be interested in construction when they get older?
So there's a few things that kids can do. Number one is when somebody comes to your house to, let's say, work on the plumbing, ask them questions. Ask them what tools they're using. Ask them what they need to do. Asking questions really is the most powerful thing to understand more of what people are doing. And if you know somebody who's actually, let's say, involved in maybe it's woodworking or it's other sorts of these works around the house, and you can get involved and you're old enough to deal with these tools, that's also a great way to start getting involved in construction because there's so many tools and pieces and types of materials that we use. So to have that vocabulary, to know all those words and to know what you're talking about is really the beginning of working with construction.
Ilan, thank you so much. This was so interesting for me, and I'm sure really interesting for all of our listeners as well.
Thank you so much, Atar. It's been great, and I'm glad we're able to talk about construction and inspire kids to this wonderful industry.
Welcome to Joke Time.
Hi, I'm Shalom.
Hi, I'm Israel.
Wanna hear a joke?
Let's hear.
I have a great joke, but I'm still working on it. I'm trying to nail the delivery.
That was good. Hey, Shalom, which country has the best construction?
I don't know.
Ukraine.
Great one. What is the tallest possible kind of building that man can build?
I don't know.
A library, because it has the most stories.
While talking about building and cool parts about construction, we asked some people, what's the coolest building you've ever seen?
My name is Akiva, and the coolest building I've ever seen is the Revolution Tower, also known as the Corkscrew in Panama City.
My name is Itamo, and the coolest building I have ever seen was the Fortress at Telefec.
Hi, I'm Ilan, and I'm here with Mike Vampy, and he's an architect. Mike Vampy, what's the coolest building you ever seen?
Well, the coolest building that I've ever seen is really one huge, big connected building, and it's like a city. It's the old city of Yerushalayim. The old city of Yerushalayim was enclosed by a wall by someone named Suleiman the Great about 500 years ago. And just about every building in the entire city is connected to every other building in the entire city. It's connected by very interesting pathways, alleyways, streets, but they all seem to be covered with arches and buttresses and very, very thick walls and what we call groin-vaulted alleyways. And even when you go up on top of the roof of some of these streets, and a lot of the streets have roofs, which is very interesting. When you go up on top of the roofs, you see all kinds of interesting domes and plazas, which you never expect to see on a roof. And when you go down into the city, you can even find old ruins of the Roman city that used to be there before it. There's a little street down inside of the old city called the Cardo, which was an active shopping street 2,100 years ago. And that street, it's still there. They found it. They uncovered it. And you know what they have in it now? Stores, just like they had 2,000 years ago. The old city of Yerushalayim, it's really one great big building. It's amazing. Everything is connected. I find that to be the coolest building I've ever been in.
I would now like to introduce David. David is Italian, and he is going to tell us about the coolest building in Rome, the Colosseum.
Hi, my name is Davide, and I'm from Italy. I want to tell you a little bit about the Colosseum. The Colosseum is about 2,000 years old. It was used for gladiator contest. It is 190 meters long and 160 meters wide. Colosseum is the most visited monument in Rome, and about 12 million of people visit the Colosseum every year.
For the final part of this week's episode, I would like to introduce my friend Gary. Gary is French, and he is going to teach us about a very famous building from France. Maybe you've heard of it, the Eiffel Tower.
Hi everyone, my name is Gary Benata. I was born in the beautiful city of Lyon, France, and later moved to Paris to study. Today I want to share with you a magical story about one of the most famous landmarks in the world, La Tour Eiffel. Once upon a time, in the magical city of Paris, there was a grand plan to build something truly extraordinary. A giant tower reaching high into the sky. These ideas came about in 1887 because France wanted to show off its amazing skills at the World's Fair. A brilliant engineer named Gustave Eiffel and his team began to build this tower. They worked very hard, using more than 18,000 pieces of iron and over 2.5 million rivets to put it all together. And it was like building the biggest puzzle in the world. Finally, in 1889, after 2 years of hard work, the Eiffel Tower was finished. It stood proudly at 324 meters tall, like a shining beacon in the heart of Paris. People were amazed and came from all over the world to see it. The Eiffel Tower became a symbol of France, representing the country's creativity and engineering genius. And that's the magical story of how the Eiffel Tower came to be.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode about construction. We hope you enjoyed our interview with Ilan, learning all about different parts of construction and most importantly, about the huge crane. Share Yisrael and Shalom's jokes with all of your friends. We hope you learned something new about cool buildings like the Colosseum and the Eiffel Tower. If you enjoyed this episode, tell your parents to rate it for us on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this and leave us a comment. We can't wait to see you on next week's episode of Reaching Higher.